I will express my thanks for your coming today too, and it really is a delight for us to be here. It doesn't take much for us to get energized about solar cooking. I think the Lord planted it deep in our hearts, and it just flows. So we're grateful for the privilege. How does solar cooking work? If you parked your car in the sun today and you left the windows rolled up so that flies don't get in there, when you go to open the car a little bit later, what do you find? Hot. Very hot, right? And that is basically the same way that solar cooking works. When we go to elementary schools and talk about solar cooking, we tell the story, we'll ask the kids if they know what happens when they roll the windows up on the car on a hot day. And yeah, someone will venture their hand up and say, well, it's hot in the car. And then we tell them, now let's put on our thinking hats. And what if we're sitting in this car and the windows are rolled up? Yes, it's hot. But now we're going to change that metal roof to a window or a piece of clear plastic. And now the sun is just shining right down into the car. What happens now? Oh, it gets a lot hotter. Yes, you're right. Now, think about if you're sitting in that car on nice upholstery on the seats, and the windows are rolled up, it's hot, and you've put on a glass roof or a plastic roof. But now, how about if you change, and instead of sitting on the piece of nice upholstered furniture, how about if you sat on a piece of black aluminum? And at that point, someone will yell, ouch! You know, they get it real quickly. That's how solar cooking works. And in the solar oven, we have a housing. This one is just made from a nylon plastic. And inside of the plastic, and before we add an aluminum liner, which in the sport, it's just simply the flashing that's used for roofs, black side to the outside of the lining. In between the aluminum liner and the plastic housing is insulation, a polyisocyanurate foam, and it's a closed cell foam so that it will not absorb moisture. Michael talked about the fiberglass and how that really does present problems because it acts like a wick and keeps sucking in all of the moisture that's given off in humidity in the process of cooking. So you have an outer liner, you have an inner liner, you have insulation in between, and later today you'll be putting some ovens together so you'll understand about it. And then we have a clear plastic lid. This is an acrylic. You can hit it really hard, you can drop a rock on it, you can drop a fork on it. It's not going to break. Glass works better, but glass breaks so much more easily, and that's why we chose acrylic. And it's an acrylic with rubber in it also. And then on the bottom side of the lid is a sheet of a polyester film. And it provides a dead layer of airspace so that it acts as an excellent insulator then to keep heat from going out of the oven so easily. Most solar ovens, solar cookers that are sold on the market have just one layer in their lid. I believe yet today that the Sport is the only one that has the 2 layers. And it's far more insulating, and it's the reason why it works. Our personal mentor was Barbara Kerr. She was a social worker as well as an RN. She lived on the East Coast. She was a habitual smoker. And with pollution in the large cities, she really developed some very major severe lung problems. Ended up moving to Phoenix. She and 2 or 3 of her friends heard about solar cooking. One of them had read about some soldiers using it, some French soldiers using it in war. And she thought, I wonder if that could really help us, if that could work. And so the 3 or 4 of them just started playing around, as Barbara says, in their backyard. They came up with this cardboard cooker. They chose to use cardboard because they had seen so many documentaries of developing countries where people do literally live in a cardboard shack, and or they put cardboard over the top of something and some thatched whatever underneath, or thatch on top and cardboard on the walls, whichever way they decide to do it. And so she thought that cardboard was plentifully available in developing countries. It is not. When we were in Haiti, our very first trip to Haiti, here we went at the invitation of Pastor Jacob, and to build some solar cookers there. So we thought, we'll do that from cardboard, as we had seen done. And Mike and Pastor Jacob spent the better part of 2 full days trying to find and purchase cardboard in St. Mark. St. Mark was, probably 25,000 people? 25 to 30,000 people. And if there was cardboard there, it was at a premium because people love to be able to put it on the ground and exhibit their wares that they want to sell in the market. So they're not wanting to get rid of it. Well, to make a solar oven like we desired, it really, you start with a washer or a dryer cardboard box, and they didn't want to get rid of that. So it really was a challenge. We ended up having to glue pieces of cardboard together before we could start folding them and make a larger box for a solar cooker. But Barbara was our mentor, and when we first came up with the design of the sport, we sent her one of the prototypes. And when she opened it, she was so offended because it indeed only had a lid of this size. The difference in it was that it was acrylic on the top and we had glass on the bottom, and it was in a wood frame. And she thought, what in the world are Mike and Martha thinking about? There is just no way there's enough space, dimensions here, length and width, to allow enough sun into the oven to cook. And she was so offended, she just put it away. She looked at it and that was all she did, because she was convinced it wasn't going to work. After a week went by, she thought, I can't do this to Mike and Martha, they're my friends. I've got to find out if this thing does or does not work. So she got it out again, and she put food out in it and cooked in it, and she was astounded. And the reason why she was astounded was because of a good quality insulation that held the heat in, plus the 2 layers in the lid holding the heat in. Heat wants to go what direction? Up. Heat wants to go up. So when there's only 1 layer in a lid, it is not going to work nearly as well. So the key for solar cooking is that we use black pots. Okay, a few little white specks on here, doesn't matter, but they're black. These are a thinner wall. They're steel with granite or porcelain on it. And then the interior of the oven is black, okay? Think about the car scenario, or think about if you're going to work outside on a hot summer day. Do you want to wear a white blouse or shirt, or do you want to wear a black one? White. And white because? It's cooler. Even the black colors in our clothing absorb light, converts that light to heat rays as opposed to light rays, and it transfers the heat to our bodies. So if we're using white, white will basically reflect heat away more, and that's why we use black for the interior. So the greatest single variable in solar cooking is just simply the quality of sunshine that gets into a quality of a cooking chamber. And we will talk more about that. I passed out the little condensed version of a manual that we used to publish. By the way, This solar oven, it owes thanks to numbers of people. The slanted face and the slanted walls are a thanks to Gordon and Grace Magny, who worked with refugees, Afghani refugees in Pakistan. And they were able to mark a rectangle with paint or chalk, whatever, on the floor, and the people dug that pit out. They lined it with straw, and then they set a metal liner into it, so the earth became the housing, okay? They lined it with straw, not the very best, but it was what they had that they could use. Dropped in an aluminum liner, you know, made out of this type of thing, and they painted it black. Chalkboard paint, if you don't go the route of a black flashing, which unfortunately when you buy this, you have to buy 50-foot rolls, unless you happen to find it someplace else, at a garage sale or something. You can paint it with a chalkboard paint. Crayola chalkboard paint is not a good brand to buy because as opposed to it being a slate base, it's an oil base. Oil-based paints give off so much more vapor for a lot more time than what the slate base does. So it's just better to use slate-based paint. Anyway, Gordon and Grace just set the aluminum liner down into the straw insulation, and then they had a lid that they would configure, and they would set that on top of it. The people would put their food into the pots in the ground chambers. Sun would shine through the lid. The pots were painted black also, and they were able to solar cook, which was a big help. And really, I think even yet to today, they are responsible, and they were missionaries, undercover, working in Afghanistan as social workers. And they, I believe, still today have had the largest, most successful solar cooking project internationally. The huge challenge is dollars. That is the simplicity of it. And when you have an entity like Shell Oil competing against you and paying buy-offs, if I could use that term, I would guess it's a buy-off, because they provide funding to the UN or whatever for efficient wood-burning stoves in the millions of dollars, and only like, what, $50,000, $75,000 has been put into solar cooking by comparison.
How about someone like the Gates Foundation? They would appear to be someone that might be able to fund it on a larger scale.
They would be. They're backers of the efficient wood-burning stoves. There's a huge push within the UN for the Clean Stove Alliance. And Shell is the one who has jumped forward with that. And as Mike inferred earlier, they're working with Stove Tech, an organization out of Colorado, and they have poured dollars into this design of a efficient wood-burning stove. Works decently well. I don't knock it. It really does work well. But it is also designed for retrofit so that they can easily slip in petroleum products of what kind of fuel? Bottled gas, right. So that they can just attach bottled gas to it quickly, and people could cook with bottled gas, and therefore they're able to continue to sell their petroleum product.
This is the cleanest stove of all of them.
I know it.
Deforestation,
Yeah.
all these people would be like saving the trees, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You would think that, but it isn't what's out there. We have been at international conferences sponsored by the UN. 2 different ones we've gone to. There have been many more. We just haven't had the funds to be able to go to more. And both times, representatives from the World Bank, in particular, got up, come to the podium, and their speech is really short. Within 5-10 minutes. And in the middle of their speech, they will say to audiences of 300 plus people or more who are solar cooking enthusiasts and know that solar cooking really does work. And they'll get up there and they'll say, solar cooking has never worked. It does not work today, and it never will. And people just, what are you talking about? You know? And out of respect, you don't jump up and say, excuse me? If we win again, we probably would jump up and say, excuse me? You know? Because what they're propagating is not true. So there's just a lot of resistance from the international community and the big dollar people. And we're still praying that God helps turn it around, because just as you said, what is cleaner than solar? What is free like solar? What is time-saving? What is healthier when it comes to breathing? Whether, you know, even bottled gas, as clean as it is, you still don't want to inhale all kinds of fumes from bottled gas. It's not good for the lungs. So, you know, we still look forward to the day that this stuff can move forward in droves. And that was why when we did start, which is 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, we started with a mold that would make 1 million parts, because we know the need. We traveled for 5-6 years before we ever got started with solar cooking internationally in developing countries. We traveled for 6 or 7 years, like Michael mentioned, going to Haiti with Pastor Jacob, with a specific eyes open and ears hearing, is this really true that so many people don't have fuel to cook their meals? And it is indeed very true. And, you know, decades and centuries ago, people could just walk across the road and chop branches off of trees, and they would have enough fuel to cook with. The tree would grow more branches. The tree would drop seeds, and other small trees would start if they did indeed cut one down. And it was not a problem. With the population increases, that has taken tolls. And our friend Penny Njoroge from Ethiopia, she said that in the area that she worked in with women's groups, the women would be up at 5 in the morning before the sun would come up. They would sense dawn coming, and they would get up, and they would get ready for the day, and then start walking to go gather firewood. They would not return until 1 in the afternoon, okay? So that's 7 hours per day. And the women were doing it because of the long distances that they had to walk and carry the weight of the wood. They would do it 6 or 7 days a week. If you multiply 7 times 6 days a week, that's 42 hours a week. If you multiply that times 7 days a week, that's 49 hours per week just to gather firewood. They have not gone to the water holes to get their water yet. They haven't gone to the garden to work with the gardening. They haven't prepared or cooked their meals yet. And I share that to just share that what women go through in developing countries is pretty major. It's pretty major. I would hate to think of having to give 42 hours of my week to simply gathering fuel to cook my food with. It's very real. So these are the things that have tugged at Mike's and my heart, and why we committed to doing it, and why we put the money we have into it to do it. And do we regret it? No, we don't regret it. And we still look forward to the day that it will indeed advance with major input for people. So back to how does solar cooking work? I've told you the essence of an outer box, an outer container, insulation, an inner liner with a lid, hopefully with 2 layers. And the dark colors absorb the sunlight, convert the light rays to heat rays. That heat is transmitted from the black metal surfaces to the black metal pots. Pots, as I mentioned, this is enamel on steel. You could use glass. There's some dark brown glass that has been produced. Works okay. Pottery can be used if it's a dark color. Your heavy cast iron could be used if you want. The differences are the thinner the material is, the more quickly heat is transferred to the food, and it will cook the food therefore more quickly just because the heat gets to the food more quickly. The contrast is if you use the heavy steel, I'm trying to think of the name right now, it escapes me. Anyway, with that thick material, a lot of the energy is just absorbed in the pottery or the steel first, and then is transferred to the food. However, if you think about that, in most developing countries, people work in the fields during the day or are busy gathering the water and the firewood, etc. And if the food is in the pottery, etc., and it's in the solar oven, it stays hot longer because the heat from the pottery continues to keep it warm, where this metal is going to start cooling off a little bit faster. So it's kind of like 6 of one and a half a dozen of another. You choose what is best for you. That's in essence how solar cooking works. If you open the little manual that we printed out for you to page 7, we'll talk about some of the variables in solar cooking. The first one listed is the color of pots. And you can see the columns of faster cooking, slower cooking, or no cooking. So the darker the color is, the better your cooking experience is going to go. Second is the size and shapes of pots. Big pots, and literally in developing countries, they'll have 60-liter pots. They're huge. They use them in the orphanages, or they use them for whatever gatherings. And they'll use like canoe paddles for stirring it. They're big. They're very big. That does not equate to solar cooking. Because the heat is transferred from your liner surface to the surface of the metal of the pot or the pottery, you want to keep that surface as small as possible to get it conducted to the food more quickly. So several smaller pots is better than a huge big one. The huge big ones will not work. Material and thickness of the pots, I already referenced that. Thinner pots work better. Thicker pots just take a little bit longer for the process to get started. Food piece size. A whole chicken can be cooked. We have some chicken in the solar cooker today. I just bought some thighs, and they're cut up. They will cook a little bit faster than if the chicken had been whole. But those 3-liter pots will hold a typical chicken, and you can roast a chicken whole if you have that preference. Food quantity. If you only have 4 pieces of drumsticks in the pot, they're going to cook faster than 8. Okay? Water content. One of the marvels of solar cooking is that it truly is a waterless cooking. For those of you who were here when I put the food out this morning, was there any water on the yams? No. Was there any water on the chicken or any oil on the chicken?
Not that I saw.
No, none. It's truly waterless cooking. And the beauty of it is that the food is cooking in their own juices. When we cook on the stove top or in the oven and we use higher temperatures, we have to add an oil or water to keep things from burning. And then what do? When we're done with it, then we dump that water down the drain or pour it out on the ground, right? And with that, there goes some of our minerals and vitamins. Okay? Which the water has leached that out of the food while it's been cooking.
Clarify about rice.
Now, for rice and grains, which require rehydration, then you do add water. And in general, with rice and beans, you would add the same amount, but you might reduce it by 1/4 to 1/3. That's what I tend to find good ratios for me, for my palate. Randy?
So can water be boiled in a solar oven like that to purify water?
Yes, water can be quote unquote boiled in an oven, solar oven. It does happen. Most often it does not happen. But we will talk about water pasteurization. Water can be pasteurized, killing off all waterborne, bacteria, spores, whatever lives in water and can cause sickness that can be killed by pasteurizing water. It's very similar to how we pasteurize milk. To pasteurize milk, we do not bring it up to a boiling temperature. We bring it up to a lower temperature with a time duration, and it is pasteurized, and the bacteria that might be in the milk has been killed off by that process. Going on to the next page on page 8, seasons and time of day. Basically, you can solar cook anytime you can see your shadow. If you look outside today by the trees, you see a lot of shadow under those leaves, or the shadow from the building on the balcony right there. So that's the key. If you can see your shadow, you can solar cook. And on here, we're illustrating when the sun is directly overhead, your shadow is very small. That is the best time of cooking. So midday hours are the best time of cooking. If your shadow is lengthened, you're not going to be cooking as effectively during those hours. If your shadow is very long, like at sunup or sundown, you're not going to have effective cooking at that time. Clouds are dust. Michael referenced the experience we had in Texas with this dust storm having blown all the way over the Atlantic. It was amazing. And that is a variable. And in some of the countries, they do have to take a damp cloth and wipe the lid of their solar oven to remove the dust once or twice if they have a lot of dust moving around in the atmosphere on those days. Mark?
Acrylic is very susceptible to
Scratches.
and especially if you're dealing with dust or fine, grit, like from a dust storm or whatever like that. Is there any precaution, or is that just kind of the way the
The caution is a soft cloth and lightly damp, and you wipe it gently. You don't bear down on your wiping of the acrylic. It's a very good question, Mark. But if you do that, if you use a soft cloth and you moisten it and you wipe gently, you will not impair good performance of the acrylic. Okay? Wind factor. The windier the weather is, the less efficiently the solar cooker is going to perform. And it's simply because it's like your oven in your home. You know, if you touch the wall of your oven, you do not get burned. But you feel the warmth of the oven because it's gradually conducted through the surfaces of the oven and the insulation used in your oven, but it still will get to the outside minimally. Same thing with the solar cooker. The heat is eventually conducted to the exterior, and as that wind blows, it keeps carrying the warmth away, which draws more warmth out of the inside of the oven. So wind does have an impact on solar cooking. So you can see that there's a lot of variables. Another one we haven't illustrated graphically, but aiming the cooker at the sun. Basically, okay, so here's where the sun came up this morning, that's east. When I was working at the insurance company, we would cook, the vast majority of our days outside, with the exception of the winter. We would on the weekends still cook outside. But we didn't face the sun east. We didn't face the cooker east. We didn't face the cooker west. We faced the cooker south. We would leave at 7:30 in the morning. We wouldn't get home until 5:30, 6 at night. It sat out there all day long, and the food cooked wonderfully. It did not spoil. The warm-up was gradual from the sun from the east. It cooked in the good midday hours, and it would start cooling off with a quality insulation in there. It held heat on it so that there never was spoilage. We would come park the car in the garage. The solar cooker would be sitting in the yard outside. We would open it up to try to hold on to the pot. If we were going to squeeze it, we would burn our fingers. But if we just gently kind of picked it up and carried it like this, without pressing our fingers into the metal, we would be able to carry it inside the house. We'd open up the cupboard doors, put our food on our plates, and sit down and eat. Our food was cooked for us very nicely. I'm going to answer your question in just a minute. However, we found that I don't like mushy vegetables. I prefer semi-chewy vegetables. So for the most part, the vegetables that we do via that method of all-day cooking were our root vegetables. So potatoes and your yams, parsnips, rutabagas. We did do cabbage quite a bit. I don't mind cabbage being mushy. But your things like spinach or broccoli, oh, I hate them overcooked, So we would leave that and do those on the weekends. Or if it was a rainy day, then we would eat our broccoli and our spinach and all those other good things that get mushy easier. Okay, you had a question.
Did you ever have issues with critters if you left your solar cooker out?
No, we never have. We have heard one instance where a stray dog that was very, very hungry did disturb a solar oven. He burnt his snout and he was gone. Because, the food content was just too hot for him. We have heard of one time where a bear swatted the solar oven, hoping to get it open, but didn't succeed, and he went on his way. In general, whatever critters they are, they sense the warmth and the heat, and they back off, because that doesn't equate with their eating. And they don't want to be burned or experience pain, and so they back off. That's the only incidences over these 20 years that we have heard of.
One other thing, as far as your food, your food has to be thawed or you cook frozen?
I have often done frozen chicken, and I put my measure of 1.5 cups of rice with it, and I don't even add water. I add my mushrooms and onion and whatever, and the moisture that's in U.S. chickens, because they pump water into our meat, is enough to cook that 1.5 cups of rice. And the chicken cooks wonderfully, and there's not a problem with it. With any food spoilage. The only time that I heard of food spoilage was a family had our friend over, Leroy, and that chicken spoiled. But guess what? Leroy said it was spoiled before it went in. So they were hoping the solar oven was going to clean up the spoiling. Well, it didn't. Well, It does kill the bacteria, but I don't know for sure. I couldn't tell you what, for certain, what temperatures that chicken was brought up to by what durations. But flavor-wise, it was not good. Which killing that would not have corrected that. Corn on the cob is superb. It is just wonderful. Because when we steam or put the corn in water, that takes so much flavor away from the corn on the cob. You cannot believe how delicious corn on the cob is out of the solar oven. It is wonderful. And you've got that season ahead of you. It's a wonderful thing to enjoy. What other questions do you have about what do you want to cook? What would you want it to cook? What's your question? Will it cook?
She brings up corn on the cob, and so much corn on the cob that you buy at the grocery store is cut from actually.
Several days ahead.
Yeah, and of course, then if you look at it, it's almost desiccated, at that point. When you're cooking in a solar oven, whether you add water to it or not, I would assume not.
Not. Definitely right.
Like that thing where you have an older cob of corn that's not cooked yet, does it rehydrate?
Yeah, it will. That the corn kernels will absorb some of the moisture out of the cobs. I haven't done that much with that because I usually just buy it and then we eat it.
What's your favorite meal?
I can honestly say that the only thing that I have not enjoyed out of a solar oven is mushy vegetables. But I don't care if it's lasagna or chicken or beef or fish. Hunters love the solar oven because most wild game tends to be a drier meat. And so it's much more flavorful because the juices stay in the meat in the slow cooking process. So venison, duck, quail, you name it, they love it.
When you said the mushy vegetables, basically because they're overcooked or
Yeah.
cooked all day long, can you open a solar oven, put in the vegetables, so you know that it only takes a certain amount of time? Can you quickly open it, put it in, and then
If I'm going to cook asparagus or spinach, for instance, I put the rest of the stuff of my meal out earlier. And for asparagus, 20, 25 minutes before, if it's midday and it's good heat yet, I'll just put it in for 20 minutes. And it's wonderfully cooked.
That sounds great.
You don't want to be peeking very often.
Yeah,
At the start, let it sit in there an hour, hour and a half. But once,
Now, Mike, when you say peeking, are you talking about the pans, or are you talking about peeking with the lid?
lid open,
Opening the lid, opening the lids of the pots. Unless you're doing fish cooks the easiest of any of the meats. And depending on, are you putting a whole fish in there that might curve around the edge of the pot a little bit? Or are you just putting in a couple of small pieces of filet that you and your spouse are going to eat, But if you're just putting in a couple small pieces of filet, if it's good sunshine, your fish is going to be done in a half an hour. It's that quickly that it will work.
So many questions.
Yeah.
So, as an example, like if I put stuff in my crock pot, let's say some meatballs, chicken, and you want to add like the barbecue sauce to it, are you putting in kind of the same amount of like sauce or less?
In general, people will find that they will use a little bit less of spices just because the flavor of the food is so wonderful, and then your enhancing spices just bring out the best of what's naturally in the food also, and you don't have to use as much. When I do ribs, pork ribs or beef ribs in the solar oven, which you talk about corn on the cob, barbecued meat in the solar oven is superb also. because that can penetrate in that slow cooking process. But what I do is I cook the meat for maybe an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half. Let me clarify that by saying, here in the upper Midwest, most meals are 2 to 2.5 hours, okay? But if I'm doing ribs, I will plan on 3.5 hours. And after an hour and a half or an hour and 45 minutes, I will open it up and I will pour the juices off of the meat. You will be surprised how much juice there is in meat, the broth and or oils from the fats. And I will pour that off, and then I put the barbecue sauce on so that the barbecued sauce isn't watered down. The broth that you pour off, you can keep and use that for when you cook rice the next time, or you can use it to pour on your potatoes the next time, you know, or use it for a base for your soups. When you cook soup, nobody has asked about soup yet. Soup is different in a solar cooker. You put all your ingredients of what you want in your soup except for the water, okay? And you can put it in one pot or in 2 pots. You might do your meat in one because maybe you want to be able to pour some fat off if you know there's fat on that piece of meat, or there's a lot of fatty grain within the meat. And you put your vegetables in another pot, or you combine your vegetables and your meat in one pot. And then you let another pot in the solar oven just warming up the water, okay? When your meat and your vegetables are cooked, then you just pour them into your hot water and you have wonderful soup. Works very well. Mark?
For soups and stuff, I appreciate you really comment on that, because I love making soup. But for instance, I put my, it's not really a roux, but I make kind of like my garlic and my curry and things like that, my spices, and then I add the thing to that. If I understand you correctly, you're saying put all of that together and then it creates its own flavoring. And then that's the first part of my question. The second part of my question then is, like with most vegetables as opposed to soups, with soups you cut your vegetables in smaller chunks and pieces so that you're going to be cutting down, according to this, you're going to be cutting down your cooking time, but then you're changing over your meat or whatever. How do you balance that out?
Okay, you've got several good questions in there. Let me just address first, the reason why you never add water in solar cooking is because water is a heavier and denser medium than any fruit, vegetable, or meat is, or grain. It's very dense and it's very heavy, okay? You think about carrying a pail of vegetables versus carrying a pail of water, guess what's heavier? The water is. And it's much denser. Therefore, it's much harder to heat up. Now, how many of you drink water at 212 degrees? We don't, okay? And even if you were out and you were, going off the grid here at the wilderness, or you were up in the boundary waters and you were definitely off the grid and you're dipping your water out of the lake, that water only has to go to 149 degrees Fahrenheit for a 10-minute duration, and all pathogens that live in the water are killed, including the critter that comes from the beaver urine that causes a lot of Giardia. There you go. Yeah, nasty stuff. So, and that is documented by Robert Medcalf, a microbiologist, University of California State University in Sacramento, California. He and his graduate students gathered water samples from all over the world with every known pathogen that they could find. And they charted out you know, if it's fast heat, at what temperature does that pathogen die? If it's slower process of warming it up, at what temperature does it die? And or if it's at the slow process, what temperature, may not be dead yet, but if it's at this temperature and it's maintained for a certain length of time, at what time duration does it die? And they charted all of this out. And what they found is that every known pathogen that they knew of, if that water is heated to 149 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes or longer, and that information, some of that information is on one of these pages. Okay, page 12. Yep. Then the bacterias, etc., are all killed. And coliforms, E. coli, Giardia, I don't even know how to say all of these, rotaviruses, enteroviruses, and the list would go on and on and on. But those are the major classifications right there that they did list. And this is, and I'm going to come back to your questions about soups, Mark. I haven't forgotten that. This is, there's several varieties of a whoppie. I have 2 of them here today. This is one that hangs with a very fine cable. So it's very flexible and, you know, doesn't knot up, and it's not going to melt in temperatures, you know, with the pots, etc. It goes into the water. This other end of the string hangs over, the lid would go on here. This would go into the middle of the pot. You know, it may not end up in the precise middle, that doesn't matter, but you don't want it over touching the middle wall, okay? This wax is what type of wax was it, Mike? Soybean wax, thank you. It's a soybean wax that melts at 152 degrees, okay? So when you are in a solar cooking environment, for the water to get up to 152 degrees, it's been at 149 degrees for probably 10 minutes or longer, okay? And when it melts, it runs to the bottom of the tube. The bead on the bottom keeps that empty end down. It might lay like this, okay? But it's still down, weighted by this little bead here. And when you see that wax has gone to the bottom of the tube, you know that your water is safe for drinking, okay? It will recoagulate. If the water cools down enough in the pot, it will recoagulate in the bottom of the tube. If it isn't, when you take it out, it recoagulates in a half minute to a minute, or even faster, depending what your temperatures are outdoors. And then you simply pull the string through, and the wax is now at the top for the next use. This is made out of a polycarbonate, and you could stamp on it as hard as you want, and it's not going to break. It's very, very tough. They have made tens and tens and I think hundreds of thousands of these, and they work very, very well and will document water pasteurization, okay? That is major for developing countries. And yet, we haven't proceeded real far with it because cooking food is so much of a problem that most of the energy that they can maximize with solar cooking, they still cook their food. By the time you're past 5 years of age, you've probably built up enough immunities to fight off the majority of what you need to fight off that they're used to getting. This is the other whoppie, and it simply goes into this little plastic holder on the bottom of this. Whoops, I need to put the green wax up. You close the lid and you put it in the water and it floats. And again, when that melts and runs to the bottom of the tube, you know that it's safe for drinking. You will not get sick. I told one lady, I think she went to Tanzania. I told her, I said, if you have problems with water, you can count on this being safe and you will not get sick from water that you drink if it's pasteurized. And the one thing about it is it does not purify the water in that it will not get rid of bad taste, okay? But how much better to drink bad tasting water to keep your body hydrated so that you will not get sick and just endure the bad taste, unfortunately. They got to the village they were going to, and the pump for the well went out. And they couldn't get parts for like 10 days. And so she, being an American and not knowing, not having built up immunities like the locals had, it was a challenge. And she said they went to the borehole, and she said there was green slime all over the top of the water. You bring it up with a bucket, and the dirt falls in as it comes up the side of the earth, and the green slime is there in the water. And she said there were snakes swimming all over in it, and whatever other critters. And she said, I remembered what you said, Martha. And she said, we pasteurized the water in the solar oven. And she said, it's what kept my husband and I healthy for those 10 days until they could get water from the well again. And she said, you're right, it did taste bad. She said, but we didn't get sick, one iota.
Are those readily available in developing countries?
No. But they're readily available to be ordered for developing countries. I think this is a some people sell this for $10. I think you can find it for maybe $6 also. Okay, now, is your question about water or is it about cooking? It's about this thing, okay? And then we'll go back to the soups.
How does that take into account the need for 10 minutes?
Well,
You understand? I mean, if it
yeah,
melts,
the
it
fact
melts now.
that it doesn't melt at 149 compensates for that 10 minutes in a solar
I said
oven.
it was 152.
Yep,
Okay, got it.
right.
That makes sense.
And if you are using this, like if you were in the Boundary Waters or you went down to a lake around here and you dipped water out of the lake and this is floating around in there, most Americans have a cell phone or a watch and you can time your 10 minutes.
Sure, yeah, I forgot about
The
that.
10-minute duration is significant at this when you see it melted.
Yeah.
Did you have something?
Well, we should clarify that those are being made by some of the same folks that have helped us in the past, right? So they're right there in North St. Paul.
Yeah, I didn't finish with who we needed to acknowledge. Lots of people. Clinton Loney is the one who suggested the receded lid so that it doesn't carry as much wind away and it does not blow off as easily. We were blessed with research and design engineers from 3M who were retired. John Roach in particular headed up the solar division for 3M and gave us a lot of excellent counsel on the design of the oven as well as his practical hands-on design work also. Clinton Loney, I guess I did mention Clinton Loney. I mentioned the, Gordon and Grace Magny from Afghanistan. And then Paul Funk is the first person that we know of who did his master's research and his PhD research on solar cooking. So he documented a lot of real practical things that we benefited from in the design of the oven.
So,
Should we be taking a little break? Mike has a comment, and then we'll still come back to soup also.
We're gonna do lunch at noon.
Can we back that up to 12:30 or 1? I think what we should do is let's have a 10-minute break to get something to drink and use the restrooms if you want. And then I'd like to recommend we'll go outside and we'll take a peek and see what's happening temperature-wise,
No peaky.
depending on what the temperatures are.
if I could just finish this thought. If you belong to a church or a group that would like numbers of walkies, you can contact Bob directly and he'll give you a better price.
The nice thing about those is transporting's easy, not too much weight.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. It's a challenge, though, whether they're using firewood or what, it's just, it's a challenge for them to do that. And they're so used to not doing it for centuries. And they know they need so much more wood already for cooking meals, and they can't go without eating. So they just continue drinking the contaminated waters. But it's still an educational process that needs to happen.
We have found a water filter, it's like the Sawyer filter, that typically they're like 65 to 75 bucks, that I can get wholesale for 18 and they're guaranteed for 4 years. So when I can have clean water at about $4 a year, that's a pretty good deal.
Now, what type of volume will it do daily?
It's enough for a household, I forget how much it is, 20 liters for drinking water.
That's wonderful to hear about. We'd like to talk with you more about that.
Let's take about a 10-minute break. The bathroom